Well, Elliot, we're back here for another episode. How's it going over there today?
It's going well. How are you doing?
Doing well. It's a good Friday, so it's not Good Friday, but it's a good Friday.
I hear you.
Yeah, yeah, and as we're closing in on the end of the year here, I thought it would just be helpful to maybe share with those listening, what it is that we look at in terms of like mapping out a financial year. I know the work we do with our clients is probably going to be different than some of the topics we talk about here today, just because it's going to be a little higher level. I think the topics that we'll talk about today, but yeah, what I guess we'll just start things off like when you're talking to your clients for the end of the year. What are some maybe reflections or considerations that you look into for how to do next year, maybe better or the same? I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot
What
of
are your
things that
thoughts?
that jump around for me, but the first thing that comes to mind is looking at Roth conversions for the next year. And sometimes you can do this in January. Sometimes you have to wait for the tax return. Sometimes end of the year. But I think as soon as you can get those dollars growing tax free as soon as possible, that can be helpful. Particularly for folks who more or less know that they're going to have a stable income, like say we've been doing Roth conversions for a few years, or you know exactly what your pension or Social Security income benefits are going to be. Usually you can map out and do a pretty close projection for that time period to know what tax rates you will fall into, and then start to model, hey, do I want to do a Roth conversion? Now, if you have very uneven income, like let's say you're still working part-time and you're not quite sure, hey, am I going to make 20 grand this year or 100 grand? This is not for you. But I think for those folks who have been more or less on a stable path, if you can do a Roth conversion earlier in the year, particularly if the market's down, that can be a helpful place to start.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good one. I'm personally not a big fan of doing it at the beginning of the year, and that's everyone has their own way of doing things. That's totally okay. But yeah, I mean, market fluctuations throughout the year can certainly be a good opportunity to do it. I guess even if you think you have a stable job, like sometimes we just never know. I don't know. I'm usually a bigger fan of waiting until the end, but I think it's a good time to think about it at least. I
Yeah,
won't
and that
disagree
might be
with
the
you
nature
there.
of our
Yeah,
clients too. A lot of my
yeah,
clients are retired, and so
yeah.
they more or less know what their income's going to be. They're not going to randomly go back to work and make 100 grand in most cases. And so it's one of those things. And even if you are in those shoes, like sometimes I have that conversation with folks of, do we want to do a projection, have sort of a range of what income might be, and then say, do we want to do a partial Roth
Mhm.
conversion earlier in the year and then true it up later in the year when we have a better idea of how the income actually ended up? That can be a way to sort of split the difference.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this and considering it, definitely do not wait until the last 2 weeks of the year. It's a really bad time to do it. I just got the email from Schwab like, oh, like this is the processing deadline for these kind of things. So do not wait until the end of the year
Yes.
either. That's
Second
for
that
sure.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think that's a good point too. Like you said, like it can just depend on what season of life or what type of work you're in. I know a lot of my clients either, they're self-employed and they have fluctuating income, or they don't know how much they're going to reinvest in the business this year. So they don't know what they're going to push through. A lot of my clients have variable bonuses, right? Like
Mm.
sometimes their bonuses are big, sometimes they're not nearly as big as they hoped for, and that can be a good lower income year. But I'm curious too, like just as we're sitting here on the eve of 2025, like with this being potentially the last year in the current tax system, are there any? Are you being a little bit more conservative in how you're approaching that? Like this year, especially?
I wouldn't say this year, especially. I would say next year. I will be following legislation closely to see what happens with tax rates. So, for those who aren't familiar, next year is the last year of the tax rates that were changed back in 2017. And so that is due to sunset next year. But obviously, with Republicans controlling the majority here, that there's a good possibility that the current tax legislation gets extended or changed in some way. Um, it's anybody's guess how all this turns out, but it's just something to be aware of. And I personally hope for me and for clients and for everybody out there that we don't see tax legislation like in December of 2025 retroactive for the year, or even into 2026
Mhm.
retroactive for 2025. That has happened in the past. I'm hoping we get some clarity earlier in the year. And thankfully, a lot of people that I'm watching who are more in tune with this have been saying, we'll hopefully see something earlier in the year. So I just really hope that that comes to be.
Well, call me skeptical on that one, since it took them, what, 3 years to figure out RMD rules since Secure Act 2.0. So,
Yeah,
anyways,
we'll see.
I'll,
What are you
I'll
watching though?
digress.
What as January rolls around here, Matt? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I think this is a really good time just to revisit like spending. I don't
Mm,
like to go too much on budgeting for the entire year, because there is just so much uncertainty, like especially the past few years. Like, who knows how much
yeah,
houses and cars and groceries are going to cost at the end of next year. But I think it's a really good chance just to look back in total at what happened in the prior year. What did you like? If you just look at your total spending across categories, like, is there anything that jumps out at you like, whoa, that's way more money than I thought we spent in that area? Were there big expenses? Like, we had to pay a pretty large deductible to get the roof replaced. Like, were there abnormal things or lumpy expenses that came up? And I guess, how did that feel throughout the year, right? Just reflecting back on, I know Allison and I could look back and say, like, geez, in April, we were just getting slammed left and right with expenses, and we didn't like that. So we might be looking to carry more cash this year, and I think it's just a really good time to look back and see, when did you feel the most stress throughout the year? Or if you look back and say, like, oh, I don't want April to happen again, what can you do to proactively plan for that going into the next year? Maybe, like you said before we started recording, it's to save a couple extra $100 a month into the emergency fund, or just have a little bit extra cash on hand, so that when those big things do come up, it doesn't hurt quite as bad. I think it's just a really unique chance to get those end of the year spending figures. And most credit cards or banks now, they have those automatic tools where you can just get a snapshot of what you spent for the year, and have a pretty good understanding of what categories your dollars are going into.
yeah. Matt, when you go through your own spending with Allison or maybe by yourselves, I don't know how you do that. What sort of questions are you asking, or what are you specifically looking at as you go through those things?
Yeah. So I typically do the actual creation of the report, but we actually talk about it for 10-15 minutes like a week, just so that we're all on the same page. But it's really just, again, understanding, like, hey, is there anything on here, that we're not expecting, or that I just don't know about? Like, I don't know, like, maybe you're going to need new shoes or a new coat, or we need tires, or I don't know. Like, those kind of things come up, and it's so those are the kind of questions I'm asking. But also, when I review, I think it's a really good practice just to at least look through all of your statements once a year. Hopefully you do it more often than that, but it's a really good chance to catch credit card fraud, right? Random charges, or maybe subscriptions that you don't even use anymore. I think it's just a really good time to go through with a fine tooth comb, and make sure you're not leaving dollars on the table that you don't want to be leaving out on the table. Is that kind of what you were getting at, or did you have a more
Yeah.
specific
No,
question?
that is
Yeah.
exactly what I was looking for. And subscriptions, it reminds me for myself too. Did any of those teaser rates go up? That's also a
Mm.
good reminder to threaten to cancel or actually cancel to maybe get a retention sort of offer.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Charter, right? Like, if I don't know if you use Charter Internet, but if you call them on your 1 year anniversary, basically they'll cut your rate back down to the intro offer. So, pro tip for those of you here in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else are you looking at the end of start of year timing?
You touched on it, but I'm gonna piggyback on what you just said and make it maybe a little more specific in that I'm looking ahead for what are those big expenses for the coming year. Like obviously you know what happened last year, but what are you planning for this year? Is there a big trip? We just got done with holiday spending. What did that look like? Did you have the cash for it, or do you need to maybe set up a separate bucket inside of a bank account to say, hey, I'm going to put $50 away per month or whatever it is, so that way when the holidays roll around next year, we're feeling better that we actually have the cash there. Or property taxes are due. We've talked about this previously, did your property taxes go up? Do you need to start allocating more money for that? I think those are all good, whatever those large expenses are. And along those lines, how much cash are you holding? Sometimes I meet people and there's not enough cash. Like there's a very small amount. It's not going to cover more than maybe a month of spending. And that could be concerning. Or maybe they have way too much. This would be a good time to look at your 1099 interest form to say, hey, one, do I have enough cash? Do I have too much? But then also two, what is my cash earning? And is it in the appropriate spot?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And that's something I guess I do this, but I just didn't think of it. You mentioned property taxes, but also other bigger bills that happen throughout the year. Like, I think that's again where that reflection can help you see, did you spend $5,000 a month most months, and then like 1 month was 10,000? Like that probably hurt a lot, right? But maybe you had like your property taxes, your home insurance, your auto insurance, your life insurance, like all due in the same month. That's kind of what happened to Allison and I when we first got married. It was like, okay, we're paying off the wedding. Oh, but crap, next month we have like all this other stuff to pay for too. And it was a really painful couple of months. Not like we couldn't afford it, but it sucked. And
Yeah.
I think it's just a good chance too to look and see like, hey, can I move this renewal month? Like usually you can pay or renew a month earlier on some of your insurances and like shift that forward or backwards a month. Or just ask them if they can switch that if it helps you be more habitual in your spending and more routine and in what's coming in and what's going out, because that's honestly when I feel the most stressed out with
Yeah.
spending is like, oh, my bank account's lower than it should be, but that's okay because it's just the insurance. It's not going to happen again next month,
Yeah. Set up a system that works for you, whatever that is.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. What else are you looking at?
I think we touched on it briefly, but are there any like lumpy sources of income coming in? Like, I talked about it with my business owning clients. Like, are you expecting a better year next year? Like, what is the trend or general direction of the business? Bonuses, all that fun stuff. But I think it also goes back to something we'll probably talk about in future episodes when we're talking about tax returns and all that fun stuff. But it can be a really good time too, just to review your withholding on your paychecks, right? If you got a substantial raise, or maybe someone in the household cut back how much they're working, or maybe there was a job loss, you may want to make sure that you're not going to have either a giant tax bill due or a giant tax refund, so that you can, like we were talking about in the last point, work those dollars into your monthly budget and not feel as strapped, right? I actually had a client a couple years back where, they were going into credit card debt, and it didn't make sense until I saw their paychecks, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are going to get a massive tax refund, and it's gonna pay off the credit card, but it was really painful in the year prior, right? Where it's like, we shouldn't be acquiring debt. Like, we make good money, but they were just going to get like a $10,000 tax refund. It was a simple fix on the W-4, which maybe isn't as simple as it sounds, because that form is about as confusing as they come.
I'm not a fan of that form personally. I've studied it and I still can't make sense of it most of the time.
No, just make sure to divide that big number that they give you. I had a client do that once too, where they withheld $6,000 on one paycheck, which was
Oops.
the whole paycheck. So don't do that. But yeah, that's another big thing that I'm looking at too, is just, understanding what the total income should be. And I think that ties into your Roth conversion point too, right?
Yeah.
Like, just having a good idea of when money's coming in, or, maybe you're going to sell a house, or, something like that. Or I don't know. There's all sorts of crazy reasons that unexpected money could come in or not, right?
Yeah. And checking those withholdings is good, even if there are no changes, I think, just so you have an idea of what's going to happen with that. And that way, if something does change, you can just be on top of that. And I mentioned that too for two reasons. One, well, if something changes with tax rates, like they changed that W-4 schedule a few years ago and
Mm-hmm.
how to use that. And a lot of people were caught off guard. They were under withheld. And so running these projections every once in a while, just to make sure you're on pace, can be a good sort of gut check of, are we on the right trajectory? And then I work with quite a few widows. I was working with someone the other day. Her husband passed away this year. Well, they're married filing jointly this year, but next year is single. So if she kept
Mm-hmm.
with the same withholding, she most likely was going to be under withheld of next year. So it was really important for her to update her W-4 with her employer to make sure that she's having a little more taken out potentially.
Yeah. And same too, if you're expecting a child next year, right? Like, you'll probably get some more tax credits and, additional deductions there. So again, it might just be one of those things where if it's not happening right away at the beginning of the year, like, maybe you don't need to worry about it quite as much. But yeah, it's always a good thing to think about.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's probably too late for this episode, but it's also just a good time. With Roth IRAs or IRAs, you'll still be able to make those contributions up until tax day of 2025. I don't know what day tax day is this coming year. I don't tend to care until it gets closer, but yeah, Elliott's going to do a quick Google here for those of you listening.
It should actually be on April 15th this year. I know the
Okay.
last few years we've been on different
That's
days.
what threw me off because I'm like, it's how, and then last year I was wrong. So, yeah, you can still make those contributions for 2024 up until April 15th or tax day. We'll just use that disclaimer there of 2025. So it's not too late. But for things like your 401k, that could be another good thing to look at. If you feel like you have extra cash on hand or more than you need and you didn't max out your 401k, it could be a really good time to go into your employer login and just set that so that it's going to be that maximum steady amount that's coming out every month, and you don't have to worry about it at the end of next year. Same with HSAs. Again, people probably already had their open enrollment at this point, but it can be a good time too, just to think about, how much you used those employee benefits, and at least be able to make changes in the spring or fall, depending on when your open enrollment is as well.
Yeah. I would add, as you're looking at the 401k, maybe think about also, do you want pre-tax or Roth deductions if they're available? And if you have access to a mega backdoor Roth contribution where you can make after-tax contributions and do in-plan Roth conversions, that might be something to consider as well, particularly if you're making more or expect larger bonuses. You could start to plan around, how do I want to set things up tax-wise?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, it's just a good time, on the note of investment contributions, right? Like make sure that you're actually invested in your 401k. I know that sounds like a silly one, but it could be just a good time just to go check those accounts. I know we're not big fans of checking them all the time, but checking in once or twice a year, or maybe every quarter is a really good practice. And why not start at the beginning of the year, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe that's a good thing to look into this year, is like, what routines do you want to build around your finances, and when do you want to check in?
Agree.
Yeah. Anything else, Elliot?
I'm sure there's something else, but that's all that comes to mind for me.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sure there's a laundry list of things that we deal with every day, but I think at the start or end of the year, these are a really good starting point. And no resolutions from us here, but hopefully you can figure out how to set yourself up for an awesome financial 2025.
Yeah, go out there and make the most of it.
All right. We'll see you guys in the new year, and thanks for tuning in.